The recent Pixel devices have shown us that the smartphone industry has kind of been scamming us with overpriced flagships for years. Now, whether it's been Xiaomi giving us 200-watt charging, 120-watt charging, 140-watt charging, even though it only charges at that advertised wattage from like 0 to 10%. Or it's been Samsung coming up with the 200 megapixel camera that's going to be on their S23 Ultra, which likely bins down to 12.5 or 14 megapixels. Or it's been Apple's dynamic island way of dealing with a hole punch in the screen. Manufacturers have been needing ways to delineate their phones from the competition while justifying their price. But that's where the Google Pixel 6 Pro and Google Pixel 7 Pro have kind of broken the mold. Their devices are priced closer to kind of the classic OnePlus line of devices. And while OnePlus used to be lauded for creating a device that made some great compromises and offered a stock-like Android experience, nowadays their devices have become cheap OPPO rebrands and their software has declined from being a fork of CyanogenMod to a copy of ColorOS. And talking about copying and colors and stuff like that, right below this video, you'll see a red button, that's subscribe, and you would be awesome for hitting it. Now, this has left a gaping hole in the market for people who want powerful phones at sub-flagship price points with a version of Android that is close to stock. And this is what Google has been taking advantage of. Now, in nearly every comparison you can find to the Pixel 7 Pro or even last year's Pixel 6 Pro, they are comparing them to phones that cost at least 20% more money. And Google is able to give you a device that competes with these flagships for 20% less money because the hardware on the Pro models isn't the newest nor the most cutting edge. The Pixel 7 Pro is the epitome of this. Let's consider some of the compromises that were made to bring a device to market at this price point and see if you would be willing to make some of those sacrifices. I want you guys to comment down below with what you think. Now, is a 10x space zoom worth a $300 premium over the Pixel's 5x zoom in computational photography? Is 45-watt wired charging worth an extra $300 over 23-watt wired charging, even though buyers of both phones would need to get the specific USB-C power delivery PPS chargers and the majority of consumers charge their devices overnight? Let me know. Are these compromises you're willing to make? $300 for 45-watt charging and a 10x space zoom? Does that sound like a good deal to you? What about a flagship from a Chinese manufacturer like OPPO and their outrageously expensive Find X3 Pro that came in at a eye-watering $1,300 price? Sure, OPPO does offer the best charging tech and has faster charging and a microscope camera, but how much would we care about a microscope camera when Google has added autofocus to their ultra-wide given the Pixel 7 Pro's macro mode? Would you be willing to pay that much money for a microscope camera, faster charging, and Hasselblad branded color science? Are those compromises that you want to make? The reality is that for the majority of users charging their phones, they charge them overnight. And if anything, a 200-watt charger may seem a bit unsafe to your average consumer. Along with that, although we may like the idea of 5 cameras on the back of the phone, how often are we going to be using that 10x camera? Or the macro camera? And is the usage case enough to justify the price of the hardware? I don't think so. It's the same way that the Pixel 7 might not be 120 Hz, but it has an incredibly bright screen, and most users are going to care about being able to see their device in bright sunlight more than they would care about the extra 30 Hz to take the screen from 90 Hz to 120 Hz. What I'm trying to say is that the Pixel 7 series of devices has shown us that the market really cares about a few key selling points, and consumers would gladly trade these for cheaper alternative devices. And until we stop comparing the Pixel 7 Pro to these phones that cost more, it's currently the king of flagships. Not because it's the best flagship, but because it's the flagship that people can afford. But what we're going overpriced flagships that have but that's where the Google Pixel 6 Pro and Pixel 7 Pro kind of broke the. See, the reality with marketing charging stuff is that the majority of users charge their phones overnight.